Good morning, dear friends. Welcome to everyone for this masterclass, the first masterclass from the Kabir Studio in Pyramid Valley International near Bangalore. So I'll talk about Yoga Sutras and some of the insights from Yoga Sutras. All right, so all of us have heard the term yoga, and for us, the term yoga always brings together pictures of different physical poses, right? That is what all of us are used to. But a couple of months ago, it was by sheer, I call synchronicity or meaningful coincidences, when I got into reading up Yoga Sutras. And I think it was around June time frame. So since then, I've got immersed into the philosophy, the practices, the tools of Yoga Sutras. And I probably have around 20 books on my Kindle since then, looking at different commentaries, different perspectives, and applying some of those in my practices as well. What you will hear today is not the traditional way of hearing or listening to Yoga Sutras. Traditionally, even scriptures like Bhagavad Gita or Yoga Sutras, they have the Sanskrit terminology, and then they kind of talk about the English one, right? And then explain. So here, for the first time, we're going to look at Yoga Sutras more from a thematic perspective, right? So we pick the key themes, and all that I talk about will be in the context of practical application for all of us. All of us are not yogis. All of us are not monks who are supposed to be living in the Himalayas. We have a day job. We have a family, and we'll have to see how Yoga Sutras will help us in our daily life. So that is the whole idea. So let me start with what is Yoga Sutras? Yoga Sutras is a text written by Patanjali, sage Patanjali, close to 1,500 years ago. At that time, there were thousands of different practices being followed by different communities, different sages talking about those practices. So people were confused on which path of liberation, which path to happiness that they should follow. And that is one. Patanjali, one of the sages who's kind of aligned to the Sankhya philosophy. So he sat together, looked at all the practices, all the different practices at that point of time, and listed down what needs to be done, what is yoga, what is the practice, what is the tools. And that text is what is called Yoga Sutras. It's a collation of all yogic practices. It's written in sutra form. What is a sutra? Very small, very little, very short, one-liners or two-liners. You'll see, I'll show you some of the text. And then all of you who have registered through the landing page would have got the Yoga Sutras commentary by Swami Vivekananda. You must have gone through it. Hopefully, people have gone through it. So you have seen how there is a single sutra followed by the English comment. All right. So again, I want to emphasize this is not the physical yoga. To understand what is this Yoga Sutras and what is the physical yoga, I want to kind of show you a bit of a timeline. I hope you're able to see the timeline here. When did Yoga Sutras got written, and what were the preceding ones and the following ones? Right? This is again a very one of the versions that you see that is able to get. There are quite a few versions. The dates could vary. So some people say 2,000 years ago is when Yoga Sutras was written. Very similar is the timeline confusion with Mahabharata as well. So if you look at here, the farthest out is the Vedas. Then following that, there were Upanishads that were written. And then following that was the Bhagavad Gita era. That is where the Mahabharata war was written. The story of Mahabharata was written by Vedavyasa. And then around that time is when Buddhism also came into being. So this is approximately around 500 BC, right? And now we call it as BCE. And then, so when Patanjali's Yoga Sutra, according to this timeline, Patanjali's Yoga Sutra got written somewhere around 500 AD or CE. That's the normal term, the new terminology. 500 AD is when Patanjali's Yoga Sutra got written. Again, the timeline could vary. Some say it is 2,000 years old, 1,500 years old. So what Yoga Sutras captures is basically the essence of all the practices, the essence of some of the key knowledge and insights from the Vedas, from the different Upanishads, from Bhagavad Gita, and if you see, there are a lot of Buddhist concepts also. A lot are very similar. In fact, some of the aphorisms are very similar to what is there in some of the Buddhist texts as well. So that is the timeline of Yoga Sutra, right? And if you look at it, following that is when the Shankaracharya's commentary started happening. And then around 1350 AD is when this text called Hatha Yoga Pradipika got written. That is the text that has the physical yoga postures that all of us are aware of, and it's been so popular. So anytime you see yoga, you relate it to physical posture. That text is where that's coming from. Interestingly, Patanjali's Yoga Sutras talks about asanas as one of the 8 steps, but there are only 2 aphorisms, the 2 sutras that are dedicated to the asanas. We'll look at what those are when we talk about this thing tomorrow. All right. So that gives you a timeline. So the key point here is Yoga Sutras are not about yoga postures. They are much, much bigger. They talk about happiness. They talk about practices. They talk about life. And the predominant part of it is devoted to 2 things that I and a lot of us have been talking about. One is about mind, a wonderful manual on the science of mind and the workings of mind. And then second is a wonderful manual on the different types of meditation. And that is why sometimes it is also called, the practices out here are combined and called as Raja Yoga, this king of yogas. Okay, so what does it consist of? So it consists of 4 chapters with 196 sutras, very small. The 4 chapters are Samadhi Pada, which is primarily a chapter on, it's kind of an introductory chapter on meditation, right? It leads, if you read Samadhi Pada, you will understand why meditation is needed. And then it also kind of touches upon different types of meditations available. And then Sadhana Pada, that's the second chapter, it talks about the practice. What are the different practices? Ashtanga Yoga and Kriya Yoga are part of that. We will talk about it. We will take a look at it tomorrow. And then the third chapter is Vibhuti Pada. Vibhuti, all of us know, is a sacred ash that gets given at temples and holy places. It's a prasad, it's a prasadam, right? So Vibhuti Pada talks about what if we reach that state, that meditative state of samadhi. What are the benefits? What are the prasads that we get? What are the benefits that we get? That talks more about it. Talks about a lot of powers. We will cover that tomorrow. Very little. Maybe 10 minutes is what I'm going to talk about. The final one is Kaivalya Pada. Kaivalyam is liberation. Kaivalyam is realization. So it talks about what is that emancipated state? What is that evolved state? What is that enlightened state? It talks about that. So bulk of today and tomorrow will probably focus more on the first 2 chapters. The third and first 2 chapters are very relevant for people like us who have a daily living, who have a family to go to. Whereas the third and fourth chapter are a bit advanced. We probably need to cover it in an advanced level section, but that needs the first 2 chapters to be completely imbibed and the practice of meditation to be continuously followed. Right? So before we start, a quick salutation to Sage Patanjali. Patanjali is one of the foremost sages, again the Sankhya tradition. He also wrote, he's a very renowned scholar. He's obviously written Yoga Sutras, very popular for Yoga Sutras, but also popular for a couple of other texts. He wrote the Mahabhashya, which talks about Sanskrit grammar. It's a treatise on Sanskrit grammar. How do you use the words? The right use of the words in the right context. So, and then it's a follow-up. So, in Sanskrit, Panini is one of the famous scholars who wrote a lot on the Sanskrit language, and then we have Patanjali as well. And then looks like Patanjali has also written quite a few texts and books on Ayurveda. And there are quite a few books that are very popular that the Ayurvedic schools follow for what Patanjali has written. Okay, so with that, and now yoga. So that is the first sutra of the Yoga Sutras. Can you believe it? That's how it starts. And now yoga. So before I start getting into the knowledge and wisdom from Yoga Sutras being very short aphorisms, very short sutras, there are a lot of scholars who have their own commentaries who have explained, just like Bhagavad Gita, there are different perspectives, different commentaries on Yoga Sutras. So that is why I had to look at, much of the text that I'm going to talk about, much of the experience that I'm going to talk about is from 4 key texts, which I will talk about the good books, good texts that you can refer to the wonderful websites as well. I'll talk about that tomorrow towards the end so that you can take this as a follow-on and then start continuing doing it. The other one is whatever we're going to cover is just a very high-level overview. There's no way I or anyone can talk about even the first 2 chapters of Yoga Sutras completely in just around 4 hours. Right? So depending on the interest, you probably would want to kind of do a 10-hour online course sometime later. But then depending on the interest, if anyone wants to dive deep into it, but I'm definitely interested. We'll probably get that happening sometime. So beginning with and now yoga, there are different scholars, different commentators who kind of start this with the first sutra. What does it mean? And now yoga. So one of the masters, I like this master's commentary, right? He says, okay, so now all of you have been living a materialistic life. All of you have your houses, have your families, have your cars, have your troubles, have your jobs, have your careers. So you went through all that. And then you still find you went through all the successes, you went through all the joys of life. Kids growing up, talking to family, relationships, friends. You've gone through all that, but you haven't yet found what happiness is. You haven't yet found what a bliss is. And now, yoga. So yoga tells you all that. So that is why you come to yoga now. So now let us start the practice of yoga. And that's what the first sutra says, Atha Yoga Anusana. So now let's begin the Yoga Sutras. So the second sutra, and in fact, I found Yoga Sutra, the way it's been documented, really fascinating. Anyone with a journalistic aptitude, anyone who's writing books, anyone who want to communicate things better, you should take a look at the style of Yoga Sutras. The style of Yoga Sutras, it talks about, it's more top down. It talks about the message and then breaks that down into detailed explanations. There are multiple threads, and that is what sutra in Sanskrit means, a thread. So there are multiple threads across different texts, and those are the threads that I've combined. I'm going to present it in kind of some kind of a theme. All right. So this is the summary of Yoga Sutra. Yoga Chitta Vritti Nirodha. Actually, Yoga Chitta Vritti Nirodha. So what does it mean? Yoga is the complete mastery over the roaming tendencies of the mind. Yoga is the complete cessation of the mind waves. Yoga is the stilling of all the thoughts in the mind, stilling of the fluctuations of the mind. Vivekananda calls it as mind waves. A lot of others call it as fluctuations. Some others call it as modifications. So there are different terms, but net, what it says is yoga is having the complete mastery on the thought waves, having complete mastery on your mind. We'll see what it means. All right. So this I've kind of broken down each of the words. Each of the words can go into its own thread of wisdom. So yoga, chitta, vritti, nirodha, the 4 words. First word, as you see here, what is yoga? We'll talk about that first. It's the union. Yoga means union. So union of what? We'll cover that in a minute. Body, mind, intelligence, everything. So we'll figure out what it is. Chitta. What is chitta? Chitta is mind or consciousness. We'll look at the composition of the mind. What is mind composed of? What are the different states of mind and the different uses and harmful effects of mind? The third word is vritti. What are vrittis? Vrittis are the fluctuations or the modifications or tendencies or distractions, right? So we look at what are those vrittis. There are 5 types of vrittis or thought waves. We look at that. We'll talk about them more in an example-oriented way. And the last one is nirodha. Nirodha means mastery, stilling, silencing, right? So that part of it talks about how do you silence the mind? How do you still the mind? How do you minimize or stop the cessations of the mind waves? So that is the nirodha. So we will look at each of these one by one. Today we'll cover a bit of, definitely we'll cover a bit of the first 2 and some part of the third one, vrittis, and then we'll get into vrittis and nirodha part of it tomorrow. So what is yoga? What is yoga? Yoga, I said, is kind of union. It's union with what? Yoga is union with something. What is that something? Before I talk about what is that something, I just want you to do one inquiry. Just sit, close your eyes. I want you to recollect or recall one or several moments when any of the following happened. Think about those moments where you saw something and immediately went, wow, that's wonderful. I mean, something that you've seen, something that you heard, something that you felt beyond words. Feel that moment. Or think about those moments where you suddenly spoke spontaneously, suddenly made a remark without any thoughts in the mind. And things happened, things went fine. For people working in offices, it could be some kind of an impromptu presentation, impromptu talk, which you didn't know where it came from, you didn't prepare for that, it was very spontaneous. For other people, it could be spontaneous ideas. For students, it could be spontaneous ideas or spontaneous answers to questions in the school or class, right? So think about those spontaneous moments. What are those spontaneous moments? Third, think about any activity where you are so engrossed, so immersed in that activity that you lost track of time, you were completely engrossed, but totally unconscious about what was happening elsewhere. So time stopped, space stopped. You were completely into that activity. Outside of that activity, you came back and said, oh, wow, that was kind of a fulfilling experience, right? So think about any of those moments. Or think about times where you felt immensely satisfied after you've done some real hard work. Maybe you had to work for the project deadline. Maybe you had to ensure your daughter or son put up a wonderful performance. Maybe it was something that you individually started a venture and it went fine. Or maybe you had prepared food for the family and extended friends. And at the end of it, you felt very relieved, very satisfied, immensely satisfied, deeply satisfied. It's not the hedonic kind of satisfaction, right? So you felt immensely satisfied. So think of those. Or think of moments where you felt really still, really calm. It could be like you wanted to do something and then all the puzzles, all the pieces of wanting to do something fell into place, right? Think of those moments. Just close your eyes for a minute. Think of those moments. Definitely all of us would have had those moments. So, yoga is union with that stillness, the feeling that you had when you completely got engrossed in something, the feeling of wow by looking at something amazingly wonderful. It could be a scenic sunset. It could be a first of an experience driving at high speed on a highway. It could be just watching your 3-year-old sing a song that you never have expected him or her to do. Or it could be just your accomplishment. Okay, I've done my job. Right? Maybe it could be at work. If you I've done my job, I'm happy. It is that sense, it is that feeling, that bliss, that satisfaction. That is our true nature. Our true nature has several qualities, we'll talk about it, but that is our true nature. That is where our potential comes in. Things when we are absolutely spontaneous, without thinking anything in the mind, right? That bliss, there is this yogic term called Satchit Ananda. That Ananda, that bliss is what we talk about. All right, so union with that state. What is that state? The whole idea of yoga is how do I expand that state? Today we might be having one moment out of a million moments, right? But what is that state? That state is what we will talk more about in a subsequent slides, right? So yoga is basically union with that. So there is this third sutra of Yoga Sutra that talks about Sada Drastat Swarupe Vastan. When the mind is steady and calm, we are with that true nature. We are with the true nature when the mind is steady and calm. All right. So what is the true nature? How do I recognize my true nature? So these are some of the things that I mentioned when I wanted you to kind of see, feel that particular essence, right? So spontaneity. Anytime you're spontaneous, you are whatever is spontaneous is coming from that particular state. Stillness. Anytime you accomplish something that you're worried about got sorted out, that is stillness. Inner peace, inner joy, sudden clarity. You might be worried about something, and then suddenly someone said something or something came up, someone told you something, and then immediately you get that clarity, right? So that state of clarity, heightened clarity, is also something part of a true nature. Deeply engrossed in something. Again, my favorite example is there is this thing called flow. A popular positive psychologist wrote a book about flow, Mihaly. Right? Flow is about where you get so deeply engrossed in things. Right? It could be art, it could be music, it could be any creative field, it could be sports, and it could be your normal work. You could be totally engrossed in cooking. For me, I get very engrossed when I work through my presentations. When I write something, I love writing. Right? So when I write, all my everything just stops. And that is the kind of a flow activity, right? And that's where words come from. Words come from that particular true nature, right? And any best use of skills, all of us have different skills. We'll cover more about that tomorrow. So all of us have different skills. This particular true nature aligns with you or resonates with you when you are in that flow state. And one of the key characters of the flow state is when you are using your inherent skills. It's not about what someone told you to do. Each of us has some inherent skills. I'll talk more about that tomorrow. All right. So here is our true nature. I like to call it as factory settings. So what are factory settings? Clarity, spontaneity, acceptance, creativity, peace, bliss, intuition, compassion, and many more. Right? And there are these several sutras that you see. I mean, again, I'm not going to cover each of those right now. So one, not able to see that. Okay. So you're also not able to see that top right thing. So these are the key sutras that talk about what the true nature is. Because the second sutra, the third sutra talks about yoga is all about deciding your true nature. All right. I want to kind of take a metaphor. All of us have this innate intelligence, innate clarity, creativity, bliss. We have tons of it. So there was this author called J.B. Smart who wrote in the book called Clarity. I think I also saw a similar story in Zen. So assume that each of you have $1 million to spend. Each of you have $1 million or $1 billion, whatever amount you want, right? You have enough money to spend. You have enough happiness to use. And you're able to solve any problems at any time, be it of the body, be it of the mind, be it of career. You have the capacity, right? So assume that you have this $1 million. I'm just talking about dollars. The analogy is you have that huge quantity of whatever intelligence, whatever clarity, whatever things you're talking about. So if all of us had that $1 million, we can spend it anytime, any way, right? That the equivalent to that is what we have, that immense intelligence, we have that immense compassion, we have that immense creativity. All of us have that. Unfortunately, there are several things that hide that immense potential or capability from us. So all of us have the $1 million in our pocket. Anytime you want, you can get that and spend. We know we have it. The problem is, a lot of us do not know that we have it, and we look at outside to get that, right? So the bliss, the $1 million bliss, already all of us have that. All of us have it in the pocket. What would you do? I mean, imagine if you had that and went around the world doing what you want, creating things for others, right? Taking your creative potential in terms of singing, art, writing, talking, whatever it is. Think about that. You have everything. Think about the state of the feelings or emotions you would feel when you are in that state. That is that innate intelligence. That is our true nature. We do not need anything more than what we have. But unfortunately, there are a lot of other things that cloud the immense potential that we have. And that is what Yoga Sutras is about, right? What is that? So similarly, what prevents us from being with our true nature? So all of you probably recollected that state when we went through this inquiry, right? So when you are still, when you are joyful, blissful, we are the wow moment, we are spontaneous, when you are spontaneous. So maybe there were a few moments, maybe there were a few minutes, maybe they were less than an hour, right? But and then the second point I made was that true nature, we have immense quantity of that particular state with us. But what prevents us from being with that true nature? What prevents us from being with our true nature? That leads us to the mind, the consciousness, right? So we always hold mind the culprit for everything, but there are also a set of texts that hold mind as a powerful entity. Again, it's a question of terminology. We talk about conscious mind, subconscious mind, superconscious mind, right? So, what is chitta? Let's move to the next word of our four-word sutra. Chitta. What is chitta? What is consciousness? What is mind? Again, there are different commentaries on Yoga Sutras that refer to chitta as the mind, some refer to chitta as the consciousness. We will look at what mind is in a minute. All right. So I want to kind of shift here to the whiteboard. I hope you will all be able to see it here. 16. Right? Okay, so yogic science in the Vedas and Upanishads talk about us as a 5-layer body, right? 5-layer being. The being is what we're talking about, right? The 5-layer being. What are those 5 layers? I'm sure all of you have a little bit of, you might have heard some of these terms. So you have the physical body, Annamaya Kosha. These are all sheets and layers. Again, I'm not multiple bodies in sense. So physical Annamaya, energy Pranamaya, and then you have the mental body, which is Manomaya Kosha. And then we have the wisdom body, which is Vijnanamaya Kosha. And then we have the bliss body, which is Anandamaya Kosha. And you must have heard these terms in several other forums as well, right? So physical layer, physical body or energy body or the mental body, wisdom body, and the bliss body, right? Wisdom is again, there's a lot of confusion between intellect, intelligence, they are different terminologies for these 5. But for this purpose of this class and for the purpose of our discussion, wisdom is Vijnana, Vijnanamaya is Vijnana. So Jnana is wisdom or knowledge. Vijnana is special knowledge or special wisdom, right? So wisdom and then the bliss layer. So simplifying this, right? So we talked about our true nature. We talked about our inner intelligence. We talked about union with what? That is what is these 2 points. We just talk about these as our inner intelligence. We'll talk about this as a true nature, right? As I said, that particular true nature involves intuition, involves spontaneity. You wouldn't know where that came from. All those answers, all those bliss that you have, the immense satisfaction that we felt, the spontaneous answers that we got, right? The engrossed, the skills coming through absolutely fine, is all part of this. So you have this intelligence or the true nature, right? And then you have the physical body, which is our bones, flesh, blood, all our internal organs, everything. So that is our physical body. And then there are the senses. It involves the 5 senses, it involves the 5 organs of action, 5 organs of perception. So all that is part of the physical body. Then energy body is pretty much the pranamaya kosha, our breath. I'm sure there are some of you had attended the master classes on chakras. The whole chakra system, nadis, all that are part of the energy body. And then we have the mental body or the mind body, which is the manomaya kosha. Okay, so and sometimes you must have heard the terms about gross body, subtle body, and then causal body, right? So gross, subtle, and causal. So gross is pretty much anything that you see, anything that is materialistic, anything that has material to it, anything that you can feel, right? So gross, anything that is a gross object. For example, this marker is the gross, our body is gross. So anything that you can see, feel, touch as form and shape is physical, right? That is gross. These two are subtle. When we talk about those, we'll talk about this as well. So these two are subtle, part of subtle body or subtle nature. Our energy, we can't see it, but we feel it. Mind, again, we can't see it, we feel it. So they are subtler levels. And then we have the wisdom, which is more the cause, and all that's happening out there. There is a reason for why those are happening. So you have the gross body, subtle body, and then the causal body. That's another terminology that a lot of yogic texts use. All right. So now I want to focus more on the. We talked about this true nature. We'll probably expand it a little bit tomorrow when I talk about potential. When we talk about what is the purpose of life. We have an outer purpose and an inner purpose. So what is that? Something we'll talk about this tomorrow, right? So I want to kind of combine these two. I want to combine this into our true nature or bliss or intelligence. All right. And again, for the purpose of discussion, I want to simplify the top two into physical personality. Again, please remember these are all the different layers of our body. So now we have three. Our taxonomy has reduced from 5 to 3 layers, right? So we have a physical energy, we can feel a lot of things happen out there, and we have the true nature of this, which we want to be associated with. Unfortunately, we get associated with for those fleeting moments when we are spontaneous, when we see something, when we say wow and things like that, right? But the idea is to kind of get this going much, be in the state much longer than what we have. So what prevents us? Again, going back to that question, what prevents us from being with this nature, this true nature? What prevents us is this. This is the mental body. This is the mind. What is the mind composed of? Again, there are several definitions of mind for the benefit of all of you and of course for myself. I went through several texts till I felt convinced that this is what it is. Unfortunately, there are a lot of people also agreeing with that particular view, right? So, okay, so this is a picture that talks about the different sheets, kosha. Right? So, what is mind? There's a lot of confusion again. Does the mind include intellect? Does the mind include senses alone? Where is the ego? Where does the ego sit? And Yoga Sutras and yogic texts have a perfect definition for mind. And what is a mind composed of? And again, there are equivalent definitions in different Upanishads, and Buddhism also has a very equivalent definition. What is a mind? The mind composed of 4 parts. Number 1, we talk about manas, the sensory mind. Sensory mind is the one that is responsible for responding to all our sensory actions, right? They talk about the organs of perception, which is your sight, your eyes, nose, mouth, touch, and ears, right? So you have the 5 organs of perception, you have the 5 organs of action. So all that is part of manas. That is one part of it. The second part is the buddhi, right? Buddhi is intellect. So intellect is also works in composition with the senses, right? And some of you, in some of the earlier classes, we talked about the conscious mind, subconscious mind, unconscious mind, right? So intellect works with the senses. Any information that the senses gives, it's the intellect that decides this is what you need to do, this is what you shouldn't do, right? This is right, this is wrong. All the cutting, divisive things, saying that this is black, this is white, this is good, this is bad, this is joy, this is sorrow, right? So all that is the intellect's job. That is buddhi. The third key element is chitta, which is consciousness. That is the storehouse of our memory. I'll come to that cycle in a minute. So some of you might have read all the things that we've learned, all the emotions that we've mastered, all the emotions that we've learned are stored somewhere. For now, just stay with, if there is a storehouse of memory, there is a chitta, right? So that is the key part of it. And then the fourth part, which I found Yoga Sutras to be, all commentaries in Yoga Sutras talk about that, and the Devadatta Sutras it also brings that up, is ego, ahamkara, I amness, I-ness, right? So the mind provides all these four. There are different commentaries that say each of these are the different states of the mind. And there are some that talk about different layers or different perspectives of the mind. So there are these four parts to what we generally refer to mind. For the purpose of the conversations on Yoga Sutras, we will refer to it as consciousness or mind interchangeably. Right? There are four parts. Number one is the sensory, the part that receives sensory inputs, that is the mind. Then the discerning part, which is the intellect. The fourth one, the third one is the storehouse of memories, and then the I-ness. So let me give you an example of how it works. So maybe you are reading a book, reading a newspaper at your home, and suddenly you find a wonderful smell coming from the kitchen. All right, you find a wonderful smell coming from the kitchen. So your nose, your sensory mind picks up that smell and then sends it to your consciousness or your mind, right? Your sensors take that particular and then sends that particular smell, perceives that, and then sends it to your consciousness, right? So then what happens? The intellect, based on, but it probably have it the other way around. So based on the intellect immediately looks at it and say, depending on the smell, if you're already experienced that smell, it could be a wonderful smell of amazing South Indian coffee. Or it could be the smell of a wonderful dish that your mom or someone is very popular for, with the aroma of South Indian spices and whatever, right? So if it's able to, so it looks at your storehouse of memories, then figure out, hey, this is that. For example, this is coffee, right? And then it classifies that as coffee, and then brings that into your consciousness. This is coffee. This coffee smell is coming from the kitchen. And then immediately what your narrating mind, the storyteller, which is the ego, it tells you, depending on your past storehouse, whether you like that kind of coffee, or immediately brings some memories of whether of other areas where you felt the same smell, right? Or it could tell you, hey, that particular coffee I didn't like last time I had it, I probably had a weird sensation. Maybe someone was drinking that coffee, right? So your eye tells you that, okay, it factors that into your likes and dislikes. All right. If you liked it, you probably would say, oh, yeah, I need to have it. Then you probably shout from wherever it is, hey, mom, I find you are brewing coffee. Can I have a cup? So that I need that coffee comes from that I-ness, that comes from that ego, right? So again, very, very simple example of how this works. Very similar, all likes, all dislikes. For example, you look at a person, suddenly you go out, suddenly you look at some person, right? What happens? The mind constantly keeps filtering everybody. Anyone doesn't match your memory bank, it lets go, right? They come into our awareness and goes away, right? But anyone else that it identifies, suddenly you identify someone. So immediately the intellect says, oh, this is Mr. John, right? And then it also feeds other information about Mr. John. The last time in the meeting, he said something nasty about you, right? And then so immediately what happens? Your ego will immediately start trying to avoid that particular person. And that kind of brings you into action, right? You try to stay away, you try to not look at that person. So all this is mind generated reality at that particular point in time. So my dear friends, I hope that was a simple and kind of an exhaustive definition of mind. And most of the Yoga Sutra text talks about these four: manas, buddhi, chitta, and ahankara. So why am I talking about it? So we talked about all those storehouse that we have, right? So what is stored in there are impressions. Anything that we learn, anything that we see, anything that we experience gets stored in that particular storehouse as impressions. right? The only thing is there are certain things that are stored with kind of limited amount of energy, and there are certain things that are stored with a very heavy amount of energy. What are those? For example, Newton's law of gravity. Someone taught me in school. So I memorize it. I know what it is. There is no energy that I've added to it in terms of whether it is good or bad. I've not added an emotion to it, so it stores in my memory. I keep reading it. I keep studying it. It gets memorized. I know what it is, right? And similar things like E equal to mc squared. So all those things. We have relativity and things like that, right? So anything that you continue to learn consciously also gets stored in there. And anything that you subconsciously learn also gets stored in there. So which is the emotional part, right? Okay, so this is our chitta. This stores those impressions as different thoughts and emotions, right? Each of this might be very simple or they might be colored with some. We'll talk about that, right? So in each of the impressions, they are stored like what we store in a hard disk or a hard drive of a computer, right? So each of this gets stored in our chitta. Any experience that we have gets stored there. Any learning that we have gets stored there. And our mind and intellect keep dipping into those to kind of get there, right? So all experiences are converted to impressions. All actions, all words, all thoughts that we think get converted and stored as impressions in our consciousness, right? And as we continue to repeat some of those, they form thicker impressions, stronger impressions. And once it's kind of even more continuous, it becomes a habit, right? So there are different stages. So what yoga talks about is initially there are these thoughts. As you continue to do that, they become subtle impressions. And they become something called samskaras. I hope it's visible. So all our thoughts at some point, they start off with a subtle impression and then convert that into a samskara, right? And then continuous enforcement. Samskaras get embedded in our consciousness. And then when the samskaras even become much stronger, what they are called as the tendencies are called vasanas. And the fact that these are being stored as vasanas here, for example, the example that I talked about, I see Mr. John somewhere, but immediately I recollect that he did something wrong and I want to avoid it. He has a different perception of me. I judge him that he has a different perception of me, right? And I want to avoid. So what is there? There's some kind of an avoidance, there is some kind of a judgment, there's kind of fear. I don't want to go there. So the fear becomes a vasana and stored here, right? And the vasana has now that energy, negative energy of avoiding someone, and it also has a mapping of if someone tells me this in a meeting, then I have to avoid. So tomorrow, after 10 years, you go into another meeting or you go into a casual conversation in a family setting. Maybe your mom, your dad could have said something, or your sibling could have said something, and immediately you feel hurt. Where is that coming from? That is the vasana. Prior to that, you didn't have it, right? So some people are very inclined to be fearful of a lot of things. You don't even know, right, from childhood. Some people are very courageous. Some people are very skilled in a lot of things. So those all are because of those embedded vasanas, related samskaras, and the subtle impressions, right? Okay, so this is again a bit of a complicated picture, but what it ultimately tells you is your sensory mind or your manas kind of gets you those sensory impressions, and then your thought forms look at the database and then tell you what needs to be done, the action that needs to be done, right? This whole cycle is called vritti samskara. I'll talk about that. So whole thoughts creating subtle impressions, creating samskaras, they becoming vasana, the samskaras driving your thoughts, right? This whole cycle is what we are in. So with that foundation, right? So now that's all the function of the mind. So what did we look at right now? When we wanted to look at consciousness, we looked at how consciousness or mind is part of a subtle body. So we have the physical body, we have the mental body, and the intelligent body or the wisdom body, right? The combined wisdom and bliss. And we saw what that mental body looks like. According to yoga, there are four key functions, four key parts, which is intellect, your sensory mind, your ego, and the storehouse, which is consciousness. There are four parts. So with that background, so let's dive into what are vrittis. So this is something I've explained here, but I want to kind of probably focus on more on it tomorrow. But at a high level, if you look at it, the senses are our indriyas, which we talked about, the five senses, and then that provides information or prana. If you look at it, the pranamaya kosha, so they are the nervous system basically gives you all the senses, even the feeling of good, the feeling of bad. This is what anything that, for example, the coffee smell, how did it come? It came through the nervous system, and then it went into the manas. The manas separated that to be identified that to be coffee, and then sent it to the conscious mind. And then you relate to that conscious mind in terms of it looked at the database and figured out whether it is good or bad, whether it is mom's coffee or somebody's coffee, right? And then you recall, there is a memory part of it. You recall an incident because you know your mom makes wonderful coffee. You knew instantly that it's your mom's coffee and asked for it, right? Some people wouldn't even know what coffee smells. For them, that smell it goes directly away from out of consciousness. They don't even recognize it. Think, hey, what kind of smell is that? Very similar for most of us. There are some kind of fruits, some kind of flowers. Some flowers you immediately, for example, jasmine, because I grew up in a place where there's a lot of jasmine flowers. I know the smell of jasmine flowers, right? Whereas it could be entirely different part of India. Maybe there are different type of flowers. They would be able to recognize that, but not me. But they may not be able to recognize that. Where does it all come from? It all comes from the consciousness, right? So with that background, let me quickly get into vrittis. So what is vritti? So now we finished union with what? Which is our true nature. We finished chitta, consciousness. We talked about the bodies and the three and the four components of the manas. Now moving to vritti. Vritti is thought forms, right? Before that, now that we talked about mind, I want to talk about what yogic wisdom and especially Vyasa. Vyasa categorizes the states of mind into these five. One is disturbed, Kshipita. Second is dull, Muda. Third is Vikshipta, which is distracted. Fourth is Ekagra, we talk about Ekagrata, one pointed. And fifth is fully mastered Niruddha. That is the goal of yoga. All right, so five states of mind, very easy for all of us. When are we disturbed? When are we disturbed? Most often than not, we are in some state of disturbed mind, right? We have too many thoughts. There are too many stories in our mind, and we are disturbed. We are not able to take the right decision, right? Disturbance could be because of a valid need for clarity in deciding between A and B. Or in my example, as soon as I saw Mr. John who did something in the past, my mind got agitated. My mind got disturbed, right? So that is a state of disturbance. So most often than not, we are in a disturbed state because of emotions, because of thoughts, because of want of clarity. Second state of mind is dull or lazy. There are times where you are full of inertia. You don't want to really go and do something, right? Could be again different emotions that drive it, but that is a dull state of mind. Sleep is part of that dull state. And then the third one is distracted. What is distracted? I want to do something. I'm focusing on something, but there are these distractions that are coming in. Someone said something I need to do. Probably I need to do 10 things that I'm focusing on one, but there are other 8 things that are running in my mind. So that is distracted state of mind, where you're partially focused. And then the fourth one is one-pointed focus, concentration, attention. And that is what most of us who've been doing meditation, our focus has been that, right? So the first benefit of meditation is kind of getting that one-pointed focus. And the last one is a fully mastered, where your attention does not flow anywhere. It's completely under your control. The first one, attention is very disturbed, scattered. It's scattered because it has some negative energy to it. Second one, literally no energy. Mind is dull, lazy. The third, distracted, is you have some attention, but attention is focusing in multiple places. And the fourth one is one-pointed attention concentration. The fifth one is completely mastered and complete control. So yoga, the last two states, ekagra and niruddha, are the states of mind that we will be in when we follow the practice of yoga, when we follow the practice of meditation. Right? All the yogic practices. That is the goal. Whereas, why is it so? Why are the first three bad? Why are the first three harmful? Right? So and that is where we dive into 5 types of vrittis that Yoga Sutras talk about. 5 types of mind. At any point of time, getting back to the previous slide, any point of time, our mind is one of those 5 states. Yes or no? You'll be able to analyze, you'll be able to find out. And then at different states, we have these 5 different types of mind waves or vrittis that we have any moment in time. Number 1, we either think based on correct knowledge, or our thoughts are relying on incorrect knowledge. The third one, we always keep imagining, daydreaming, we are in delusion. Fourth one is sleep, we all know that. And fifth one is we are in the state, the thoughts are from our memory. So 5 states: correct knowledge, incorrect knowledge, imagination, sleep, and memory. These are the 5 states, 5 different types of thought. Any point of time, any one of us have. In fact, as I was reading through Yoga Sutras and the depth and vastness of yogic sciences, struck me a lot of things that we see and read today in modern Western texts, be it neuroscience, be it psychology. Those things have been written and documented and spoken by the great sages thousands of years ago. The Vedas, the Upanishads, all sacred texts, right? It's amazing and all of them were written with their heightened awareness or mental faculty. They just sat in meditation, they got all those messages and they wrote it down. Right from the way universe is built, how atoms work, how molecules work, what are the different energies to our body system, everything is documented in different texts. For example, Ayurveda is one such text that talks about food for the body, right? And then there are different traditional texts as well. So in this case, again, some of these are available in our more modern neuroscience texts, but it's amazing to see these are all documented 1,500 years ago. And this is a sutta where it talks about Pramana, Viparyaya, Vikalpa, Nidra, Smrityaya. These are the 5 things. Look at the sutra. He talks about, in the preceding sutra I not talked about, he said there are 5 types of mind waves: painful and non-painful, klishta and aklishta. That's what that Sanskrit word that he uses. So, and what are those 5 types? 5 types are these: Pramana, correct knowledge; Viparyaya, incorrect knowledge; Vikalpa is imagination, delusion; Nidra is sleep; and Smrityaya, Smriti is memory. So, what is correct knowledge? And then again, there's a big definition of what is correct knowledge as well. This was again a big revelation to me and most of you as well. What is correct knowledge? The definition of what is correct knowledge is you must have experienced it directly, right? Or you should be able to infer it from something you have experienced or someone has experienced. The third one is any knowledge from scriptural testimony. In fact, some of you, if you have looked at the Swami Vivekananda's commentary, it clearly lists the definition and the qualities of that kind of a person, the guru, the yogi, or the monk, whose words need to be taken as direct knowledge. And again, there are definitions that it cannot contradict earlier scientific evidence and things like that, right? So there is this definition out there. So which means direct experience is what brings you the right knowledge. So this is again Pratyakshanumana Pramanani. So Pratyaksha, I mean, all of us have known the word Pratyaksha Sakshi, right? So this is direct witness. He was there in that particular situation. So what Yoga Sutras talk about is any knowledge that is not directly experienced, directly inferred, and you read it, is the only correct knowledge. All others is incorrect knowledge. All the concepts that we hear, all the frameworks that we listen to, right? They're all good. They become correct knowledge for you only when you experience it. Same goes for meditation. Same goes for any physical exercise. All right. So here, I just want to talk about one of my individual experience. I think a year ago, probably last July, someone introduced me to running the marathon. So last July, I took, obviously there was an instructor who was helping me prepare. And in fact, that was another good thing that relates to the topic that we talk about tomorrow. I just wanted to be fit. But then he said, after a while, just being fit is a very small goal for us, right? And then after a while, you probably lose motivation and probably want to kind of do something. He said, sir, being fit is fine, but try to have some other goal, another big insight, right? Have a bigger goal so that whatever you do, there is a purpose to it. What you're doing is not just about staying fit at home. So then he introduced me to marathons, and then I signed up for one 10 kilometer. Obviously, I'm not a full marathon runner yet. I don't know if I will be, but 10 kilometers run. I was preparing for it, and all the people started advising me, oh, you have to eat this, you have to be strong, you have to be. I've never run 10 kilometers prior in my life. And people who know me, I'm not a sports person either. Right? So I've never run 10 kilometers, leave alone. I mean, I've never even run 3 or 4 kilometers, probably a lot. So running 10 kilometers at that particular first point, I was also kind of very, I had my own doubts. Would I be able to run listening to all this information and all, go after 5 kilometers? You'll drink water, you will get exhausted, right? So I took all the precautions, and 2 weeks before, he introduced me to a nutritionist. So she told the carbohydrates I need to, just before 2 weeks before the run, have enough carbohydrates, keep drinking a lot of water. So all the 10 formulas I kept following, the warm-ups and everything, right? So I did. We did go to the marathon. I felt very relieved. In fact, the inquiry that I asked you to do, where you feel completely accomplished, completely satisfied, I felt at that end of that 10-kilometer marathon, because I had my own doubts, but I was putting my complete skills. I was so engrossed in finishing it, right? And more so, in fact, my only thing was, it was not about the time, it was not about the outcome. I just wanted to finish the run. And once I finished it, I kind of grew in confidence of my own capability. But once I was kind of basking in that achievement, the subsequent month, it was full of physical pain. Physical pain is not the muscle pain. In fact, that's one of the things I felt very happy. Running 10 kilometers, I never felt any aches. But what happened was, obviously, because of all the carbohydrates, all the proteins, all the nuts that I ate and all this stuff, I started developing gastric trouble and then different kind of issues because of that, right? And then I said, hey, why is all this coming? You go to the physician and he said, no, nothing is wrong. So then actually it died down. So that is one part of it, where I listened to all the people and then started doing the marathon. And then fast forward to January this year. Before that, I was talking to one Ayurvedic person. What he said was, I told him about it. He said, if you eat something in the night, that should be good enough for your run in the morning. Your body has enough energy. You don't need anything else. Your body has enough intelligence to take you all the way. Right? He said, you don't need anything else. That struck with me. So January, I ran the marathon, or again the 10 kilometer, another 10 kilometer run, with absolutely no other cautions or things resources. I drank water, I did my warm-ups, I ran the 10 kilometers. No carbohydrates 2 weeks before, no proteins in terms of nuts, right? And then I was able to finish it comfortably, thankfully, right? So again here, so my body is suited to, my body has a specific signature, and that's suited to do ABCD. And then you kind of listen to a lot of these and start doing it, right? Again, all of us know how the low fat, high fat revolutions happen, right? So at one point of time, people were totally against oil, and now they are thinking about oil is okay, but this type of oil is not good. Butter was not okay, then now butter is good. This whole thing is about rice, wheat, gluten. So again, we are all fed on those fats. Again, there are different types of diets. Only thing is, there are certain things that are applicable to us, certain things that are applicable to our body, but not for all, right? For example, even from a meditation point of view, what helped me is a plain meditation, right? I've tried The Secret, I've tried the Law of Attraction, I've tried several other techniques, but it didn't work for me. But it has worked for others. So it's up to you kind of to decide on what needs to be taken and what doesn't need to be taken, right? Again, here in Yoga Sutras, Patanjali talks about several types of meditation, several types of practices. And the whole idea is, again, as I said, he was collating all the practices at that point of time. So it's about picking the practice that is suitable for you, picking the practice that is good for you. All right. So here again, the example here is direct experience is very important. And any concept that you hear, be it law of attraction, be it manifestation, be it mantra meditation, be it different types of yogic exercise, it all depends on what you try it out. If it suits you, you figure it out. There's no harm in it. But whatever we do, whatever we want to do, what brings success in that is another sutra that talks about practice and perfection, right? So moving on, just rushing through. I wanted to give one more example, but so inference quickly. What is inference? We heard a lot of these laws, right? For example, if I see smoke somewhere out there, what do I infer? I know there is smoke, there is fire. I don't need to experience it because I've already seen it somewhere. Because of that, I infer. So that inference is another set of thought waves, right? So what is the earlier sutra? We talked about these 5 types of mind waves: correct knowledge, incorrect knowledge, imagination, sleep, and memory. Okay, so I want to touch on a misperception on what is incorrect knowledge. What is an example of incorrect knowledge? Judgment, judging someone, judging other person is absolutely incorrect knowledge, right? So you do not know what a particular person said, what was the context, and all this stuff. You just judge someone because of some statement he made or because of some action. Incorrect knowledge, ignorance, right? And anything that you only know half knowledge is another thing there. Imagination, assumptions. All of us are in daydreaming, right? So at any point of time, we keep thinking, oh, if I do this, something will happen. Or something, if I go out, I mean, probably the COVID virus might come and sit in my pocket. Right? Just walking in the road. So initial stages of our lockdown, a lot of these things are happening, right? So all those is imagination. Even things like, okay, if I study well, if I get a particular job in one particular place, then I'll be happy. That is imagination. Someone has told you this is how it is. You're not experienced it, right? So you might get there, but still not feel happy. So imagination, again, there's quite a lot of stuff out there. Imagination is one, or delusion is another thing. Memory, anything that you're worrying about from the past. Again, that example of me seeing Mr. John, the memory. So that's memory. So you recollect. So thought waves can be anything. It could be direct knowledge. It could be incorrect knowledge, imagination, sleep, and memory. Sleep is another thought wave where we are not thinking about anything. Dreamless sleep. Again, dreams fall into more the imagination or incorrect knowledge of the thought waves, right? So, and Yoga Sutra say these 5 thought waves could be painful or not painful. What do we mean by that? So they are painful when they are colored by these emotions that you see. And the Sutra 2-3 talks about it, right? Avidya, Asmita, Raga, Dvesha, Abnivesha. These are the kleshas. These are the 5 kleshas what we talk about. Right? It's the 5 colors of the mind. Ignorance, avidya, raga, which is desire, attachment, aversion, which is the dvesha, and then abnivesha is more about fear, and asmita is more about the ego, right? So at any point of time, if our thoughts are colored by this, by desire, attachment, by fear, by ego in terms of getting a sense of identity or fear, that means they are painful thoughts. And all of us have seen psychology studies, right, in terms of a lot of people talking about how 80% of the time our thoughts are negative. These are the negative thoughts. And that is where the whole positive thinking realm came about, right? So this is a sutra which says you can have those kind of 5 thoughts. They can be painful, they can be painless. What are the painless part of it? Anywhere where your thought doesn't have a sense of attachment, sense of desire, sense of attaching to the outcome is painless. Anywhere where you're aware of doing that. For example, all the knowledge that we get. Let's assume I'm learning music. I need to be learning music for the sake of learning music, my full concentration into it, and then I kind of get to know, understand that more, I experience that more. That is direct knowledge, happiness, right? Non-attachment, and then I'm doing it in complete awareness. But when I'm learning music, I'm learning music so that tomorrow when I go perform a concert, all my friends, all my families would appreciate me, would admire me. Right? Oh wow, you've done such a wonderful song. Your voice is so great, right? So that kind of feeling, when I have that thought while I am learning music, and that is a colored thought. That is what leads to pain. So you have that imagination, that's again imagination. And then at the end of it, if things don't turn out the way we want it to be, what do? We feel sad. And that is another emotion that we have. So vrittis are the disturbances in our mind. Vrittis keep spinning, right, in terms of the chakras. Okay, so this is a good way, good time to kind of get into another metaphor. I'm sure some of you have read Swami Vivekananda's ebook commentary on the Yoga Sutras that I sent across. We learned about vrittis, we learned about samskaras, right? So what happened? I have a thought, repeated thought turns into samskaras. And then thought is a vritti actually. So any thought that you have can be categorized into those five. That's a big learning, big insight from Yoga Sutras, right? You can go look at it. You can think about any times you have those thoughts. It could be one of those five, and one of those five, they could be painful, painless. They could be colored with those raga, dvesha, the sense, attachment, aversion, ignorance, ego, and fear. So anytime we do that, is vritti, it creates samskaras, and samskaras get made into vasanas. Samskaras again, just because we have that fear, the fear gives rise to additional related fearful thoughts, right? So every time, so these are what is called as vritti samskara chakra. We have vrittis plus samskaras. We have vritti which lead to samskara. Our mind is always agitated, always spinning. There are all these thoughts spinning. Some of them spin with colors, like those five. Some of them are straightforward, which is good, right? The less painful are the actual knowledge and skills that we kind of develop. So those are the ones, right? So here it is. So now we'll get to yoga, chitta, vritti, nirodha. We'll come to that later. So what is this? Why is it such painful, right? Our mind, this is the mind. We talked about body, we talked about our bliss or the nature. And there is mind as one of the layers. So our mind constantly keeps thinking these thoughts. Some of them painful, some of them not painful. And everything or every thought is a vritti, and every vritti creates a samskara, right? And this is what constantly, it could be related to your family, it's related to your work, it's related to your individual self, whatever it is, right? So these things keep spinning. Just because this keeps spinning, we are not able to be realized with the true self. This whole, our body, our physical body and energy body are not aligned to our intuition. Why? Again, going back to my first inquiry, right? Why are we not feeling that sense of calmness, that sense of stillness? Why are we not always intuitive? Why are we not always intelligent? Why are we not always spontaneous? It's because of this vrittis, right? And if none of these vrittis are there, we will be aligned to our intuition, we'll be aligned to our bliss, we'll be aligned to true nature. So that is the core teaching or finding of Yoga Sutras, right? So what Vivekananda says, Swami Vivekananda, he says this, he likens to this to a metaphor, he takes a metaphor of a lake. So there is this lake, right? The bottom part of it is still. Here are the gems, here are the diamonds that we have, right? Here are the wonderful precious stones of natural bliss, intelligence, and all that. That is our true nature, right? And then the surface is the nature, what we see everyday reality, our work, our family, our relationships, and all the ills and good things of the world, right? Just because, and these vrittis or samskaras are like the mud or like the dirt in the water, right? So what we see always talks about the mind waves. So when the lake is full of churn, when the lake is full of waves, when the lake is full of mud, stones, sand, would you be able to see the bottom of the lake? No, that's where we are, right? So we know we are the true nature. Now that we know the people, we have the true nature, we are the bliss, we have immense intelligence, but we are not able to be always associated with it because of our vrittis and samskaras, right? Because of our thought process. Anything, good knowledge, bad knowledge, everything is a churn. Some of them are painful, some of them are painless. It's fine, but most of them not. We have the negative thoughts, right? So he says only when you still the waves, only when you calm the waves and cleanse this whole mind of all these samskaras is when you'll be able to see the diamonds and emeralds at the bottom of the lake, which is your true nature. And that is when you associate with nature. So that is what is yoga, right? So you are associated with your true nature in the absence of your mind disturbing. That is what is yoga. So it's amazing. In fact, I'll probably show that before we close out. Another analogy, another analogy is a modern day analogy, right? So we have our cell phone cameras, we have our SLR cameras. So it's supposed to capture the picture of reality, right? So this is reality. And this is where your film or your disk or your memory card, whatever is going to have, right? So in the absence of anything out here, whatever is a picture here gets captured into your place. So there is a connection out there, right? But unfortunately, these vrittis, right knowledge, wrong knowledge, all these act as filters, colored filters between the lens and the storage medium, right? It's like photoshopping. So if I am seeing with the lens of a fear, everything is fearful to me. I don't trust anyone. If I am seeing with the lens of arrogance, I know everything, then you'll find everyone else wrong, right? You will find everyone else talking rubbish. So that is the lens. If I see everyone with the lens of love, with the lens of compassion, I'm able to see the good things in others, right? So that is the lens of compassion. If I'm able to see with the lens of attachment, you wouldn't let go of anything. This is mine. My life is mine, right? And again, so there is the other part of Yoga Sutra to talk about whatever we think about of that I and mind. Today we are associated with the mind. Tomorrow when we listen to what we want to talk about, why all this happened, this is our true nature. That's what we talk about, true nature. This is not the self, right? And there is another term that we usually refer to here. This is called self, with the small s, the big s is out there, right? This is the self, this is the mind. You must have heard about selfless service, going beyond the self. What does it mean? Going beyond your mind, going beyond the fluctuations of the mind, right? So you're associated with it. Selfless service comes from here, from your true nature, from your bliss. You don't expect anything, so there is no churn. There is no desire for results. There is no aversion to failure. There is no fear of failure or fear of someone telling you you to do it. So all that comes from your selfless nature. Is the self is gone. And in meditation, we keep talking about no mind, empty your mind. When we say empty your mind, it's about stilling these circles, the spinning circles, stilling the stories that we have in our mind. So that is what, when we talk about empty mind, when we talk about no mind, go beyond your mind, selfless nature, right? So all that is, this whole thing becomes empty. It doesn't mean you don't live, but you're still conscious. There are still those vrittis that are your knowledge, right? So those are the correct knowledge. That is why Patanjali describes right knowledge and wrong knowledge. It doesn't mean that I need to remove or meditation erases what I've learned as proper knowledge, which is my experience. It will not get learned. I know if I write it, the write on a whiteboard with a blue ink, blue ink is what you get. Maybe a fair blue at sometimes, right? So these are things I don't need to remove from my memory. So, so what meditation, what all this yoga is oriented towards is making your real physical and material or physical body and energy body work in congruence, in alignment with your true nature. When you don't do it, That is where we get into disease, we get into affliction, we get into sorrow. Again, Patanjali, tomorrow we talk about there are 7 types of illnesses that you will get, and they manifest outside as 4 behaviors. We'll talk about that tomorrow. So this is the last slide. We'll dive into meditation soon. Again, this is the slide that just read out to you. This is Swami Vivekananda's quote on the Yoga Chitta Vritti Nirodha. So he says Chitta is his mind step. So we talked about, we saw the middle part of the whiteboard here, right? So this is the mind step. I'm just summarizing it in Swami Vivekananda's terms, whatever I spoke about. Chitta is the mind stuff, and vrittis are the waves and ripples rising in it when external causes impinge on it. External causes predict nature, right? The bottom of the lake we cannot see because its surface is covered with ripples. It is only possible when the ripples have subsided and the water is calm for us to catch a glimpse of the bottom. If the water is muddy, the bottom will not be seen. If the water is agitated all the time, which is our disturbed mind and distracted mind, the bottom will not be seen. If the water is clear and there are no waves, we shall see the bottom. The bottom of the lake is our own true self. The lake is a chitta, our consciousness. Like here the definition of chitta is the overall cosmic consciousness, universal consciousness. The lake is the chitta, and the waves are the vrittis. And that is what yoga is. Yoga is chitta vritti, the waves, fluctuations of the mind, right? Chitta vritti nirodha, it's either controlling it, mastering it, calming it down, and cleansing things of the different waves, right? So again, getting back to, I'm sure all of you have seen this picture somewhere if you have visited my landing page, right? Are you the driver of your life? Let me end with that. Are you the driver of your life? Or is it your vrittis? Is it your samskaras? Is it your emotions? Is it your beliefs? Is it other people who have told you to behave something? Or is it all the false notions that you do not know and you're going after? It's not direct experience, right? So most of the time, those are the things that drive our life. It's not us. Yoga, meditation, and several yogic practices allow you to realize our true nature, our true potential, and help us live in that state by calming, cleansing all these waves and impurities and samskaras that we have from time immemorial, right? So with that, again, one last point I forgot to mention. So we talked about this thought and samskaras happening in this lifetime, but there is also this concept of a lot of those samskaras and what was coming to us from the past lifetime. So you might have seen people 7 years, 6 years, even 5 years old being with amazing singing talent, amazing musical talent, right? Amazing sports talent. So most of that comes from their, most of those vasanas or embedded depressions have become very strong because of practice over multiple lifetimes. And they start off from there. Very similar, that's a positive case. Very similar, you might see some young kids getting real angry, real emotional. Some of them will keep brooding, oh my God, for every small thing, they'll keep, oh my God, why has this happened to me? What has happened to me, right? For no reason. And the person who's probably staying with that particular person right from the time he or she was born wouldn't even know where did he get that from, right? Again, those all are from the samskaras, from our past emotions. So we had strongly stored those emotions in our consciousness from then, and it's kind of come back into this lifetime, right? So here, this is the question, and again, we'll continue answering this question: are you the driver of your life? We'll talk about the purpose of life, and then another important thing about how each of our nature is different. What defines our nature? What defines our nature is our gunas, not the genes. There are the 3 gunas: sattva, rajas, and tamas. Tamasic, sattvic, and rajasic. These are the 3 gunas that define how angry I am right from the beginning, or how agitated I am, or how good I am, right? So we'll talk about those, how those shape your nature, how those shape your life. I want to end with this two solutions that Yoga Sutras talk about. We'll cover a couple of more slides, but in the interest of time, I want to stop here. So obviously, Yoga Sutras has documented the mind, documented the vrittis, documented our life, the composition of our mind, why we think certain thoughts, right? And obviously, it also offers solutions. What are the two solutions? Number one, 210, Yoga Sutra 210 talks about you can prevent afflictions or vrittis or pain. What is an affliction? Affliction is anything that is colored with those five kleshas, right? From arising by substituting it with a higher level positive emotion. You become angry, you become aware of it, and then immediately change your emotion, right? So that is how you avoid causing that particular impression. Similarly, as I said, you're working on something, but you feel attached to, oh, I need to do this job very good. Replace that with a higher level cause or higher level mission. Oh, I'm doing this work for the sake of that sake that my company should be running to serve thousands of families or maybe millions of shareholders. Right? I'm working towards that cause. Then everything that you do at work, be it something that's mundane, something that's boring, also will become purposeful, becomes joyful, right? So you say replace that particular painful thought, desire, attachment, ignorance, fear, and ego, everything coming from identity, with the positive intention, positive emotion. For that, you need to be aware, right? That is number one. Second one is dhyana he tat vittaya. What it means is all these mental tendencies, afflictions can be destroyed by meditation.